It's hard to deny that Sydney Sweeney is on an absolute roll right now. Whether it's her roles in the HBO hit shows Euphoria and The White Lotus, her impressive work as reality winner in the 2023 biopic Reality, the success of romantic comedy Anyone But You, and Madam alright, maybe that last one wasn't such success. She successfully established herself as an exciting up-and-coming actress of formidable talent. Her latest movie is horror film Immaculate, which she not only stars in but also produced, helping to build the project from the ground up both in front of the screen and behind. And while the prevalence of the horror genre means Sydney Sweeney can't bring back the horror genre in the same way she perhaps did with Anyone But You, there's still room to deliver a great movie in a genre that is far more missed than it is hit. Particularly if we're referencing the Catholic subgenre category of horror movies which this film exists in. And she manages to do just that, delivering on a solid horror film which succeeds where many other films in this genre failed, even if it's still too beholden some of the structural tropes of the horror film grouping to fully transcend and conquer all of its flaws. Immaculate follows Cecilia, a young nun played by Sydney Sweeney, who finds a job in an Italian convent. Despite never having slept with a man, she finds herself pregnant with what is described as a miracle child. And slowly but surely, the ominous underlying nature of the convent begins to reveal itself. It's pretty reminiscent of Rosemary's Baby, with the marketing of the film even recreating the poster to the 1968 horror film. So while it isn't a wholly original premise, it's one that absolutely works for me. There are few things more terrifying than something dark, horrific, and unexplainable growing inside your body, and the movie takes full advantage of that, functioning as a pretty effective body horror, particularly because of the ambiguity that arises from the question of whether or not the baby growing inside Celia is indeed a miracle or something here to haunt her. As is expected from virtually every mainstream horror film, this movie uses a good deal of jump scares, yet the scariest moments come from the movie's willingness to portray truly disturbing imagery. It is not a movie that shows any restraint in its use of blood and dismemberment, and I sincerely mean that in the most praiseworthy way possible, because it's genuinely rare for me to see something that straight up makes me want to shut my eyes for a few seconds, but this movie certainly did. Which could be disparaged as shock value, yet I think it works thanks to Sweeney's committed, no-holds-barred performance. In any narrative feature, the lead actor's role is inevitably a surrogate for the audience. They become the channel between us and the fictional world. And no genre is that more true than horror. When I see the unmistakable look of fear on Sydney's face, or hear the scream of horror leave her, I can't help but feel that what I'm experiencing is real. And it makes it all the more immersive in its terror. Nowhere is that more evident than in the final few moments of the film. There's an old saying that cinema is a matter of what's in the screen as well as what's outside, and the one shot which concludes Immaculate is a great testament to that. Not only because what we're not shown is left to be filled in with our horrific imagination, but because the effectiveness of Sweeney's performance in these final moments only makes you envision something even more terrifying, resulting in an unforgettable final shot that sees itself into the brain like the religious branding shown in the film. If the rest of the film were directed and shot as well as the final shot is, it's safe to say we will potentially be discussing a modern horror classic. But that's far from the case. Not only is director Michael Mohan wildly uninventive in his shot choices, the visuals are just as sterile and overly polished as many of its contemporary horror film counterparts, missing the element of grit and roughness that underlines some of my personal favorite horror films. Whether it's the original Candyman or Let the Right One In, or to use a more recent example, Luca Guadagnino's Bones and All. Instead, the movie has a drab filter applied to it, desaturating the feature of any brightness in a way that tries to emulate a feeling of horror and dread, only to find itself emulating a feeling of sadness and melancholy. It's an uninventive technique that's unfortunately way too prevalent in today's horror films, which only makes them feel overly artificial and factory-like. I mentioned that structurally the movie feels beholden to many of the flaws that have held back many contemporary horror films, and by that I mean that despite having different conceits, many horror films end up feeling incredibly similar because of the way in which the source of the horror is presented. In the case of Immaculate, the central conceit is the idea of something terrifyingly uncertain growing inside a person. Yet the film expresses its horror in the one way which modern filmmakers seemingly know how to express horror, which is by having a range of different terrifying things happen. Hands emerge from behind the wall to grab the protagonist, a mangled corpse falls off a building, and so on and so on. And while I'm not implying the range of terrifying things aren't narratively tied together, I think horror films will benefit from focusing on a more conceptually, visually consistent source of terror. In Steven Spielberg's Jaws, you've got the shark at the center, and that's that. The movie is able to spend the entirety of its runtime devoted to building up that one source of horror. It isn't wishy-washy on how exactly the threat is represented. With that said, as much as you'd like every film to reinvent and conquer all the principal flaws within its genre, sometimes you don't get that lucky. Sometimes you're just grateful to watch a movie that, in spite of being beholden to the flaws that are often found in its genre, is still pretty well executed. And thanks to a horrifically good performance from Sydney Sweeney, an admirable willingness to portray genuinely disturbing, unsettling imagery, and an unforgettable, exceptionally well crafted final shot, Immaculate is just that. A well executed horror film that you won't regret watching. I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and let us know if you've had the chance to watch Immaculate. I'm Cinemike, and I'll see you next time.